Section 4.2.25, the given data represent the total compensation for 10 randomly selected CEOs and their company's stock performance in 2009. Analysis of this data reveals a correlation coefficient of R, which is equal to negative 0.2115. What would be the predicted stock return for a company whose CEO made $15 million? And what would be the predicted stock return for a company whose CEO made $25 million? Okay, so here is this information. Let's go ahead and take a look at this on StatCrunch. Okay, so here is our data. Okay, so we're going to open this up in StatCrunch. Okay, and then what we're going to do is just currently right now, we're going to go ahead and go to Stat and then go to Regression and go to Simple Linear. We know that our X variable represents the compensation millions of dollars, and we know that the Y variable is going to be the stock return. Let's go ahead and compute. Okay, so let's take a look at this information. So we'll go ahead and copy this information here. Okay, and then we also have our graph, so we can see what our graph looks like. Okay, so let's take a look at this information. So we're given the fact, and that should match what we're looking for here. We can see that the correlation coefficient of R is equal to negative 0.2115. That's what we get right here. Okay, and then what else do we know? We know that this is our equation. So our equation tells us the following. Our equation represents, we can say that Y, okay, is going to equal, well, we have the slope, we can round it to 3 decimals, is negative 0.945, and X is the compensation, and then we're going to add the Y-intercept, which is 33.292. Okay, so this is what represents our equation. Now, are we going to use this equation or not? That is the question. In order for us to figure that out, we need to determine, okay, we need to compare this correlation coefficient with what we're going to need to use, which is our critical value. So how many total order pairs do we have here? Well, we have 10. So we know that N is going to equal 10. So that is information that we're going to need to find out first. Okay, so it's asking us what would be the predicted stock return for a company whose CEO made $15 million. All right, so let's go ahead and find out what is the critical value for when N is equal to 10. So we need to find the critical value of correlation for sample size of 10, which can be found in a table of critical values for the correlation coefficient. So let's take a look at that over here. So here we have our critical values, and we can see that for when N is equal to 10, we get a critical value of 0.632. Okay, so we have the critical value of 0.632. Okay, so we have our critical value of N, which is equal to 10. Okay, and we know that that's equal to 0.632. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to compare it to R, which is what we have in the problem, which is the correlation coefficient, which is negative 0.2115. So versus negative 0.2115. Okay, so what we need to do, okay, in this step is now we need to compare. So we have 0.632. Okay, and then we need to take the absolute value of this number, and the absolute value of negative 0.2115 is equal to positive 2.115. So we end up getting 0.2115. Okay, so we can see that the value of R is less than, you can see here, is less than the critical value. So since this value of R is less than 0.632, what happens here? Well, what happens is that when the correlation coefficient indicates that there's no linear relation, that tells us that there's no linear relation between the explanatory and the response variables, and the scatter diagram indicates no relation at all between the variables, then the mean value of the response variable is used as the predicted value, so that y is going to equal the sample means of the y. Let's take a look at the graph again. Okay, if you can see here, you see the scatter plot? Okay, it doesn't give you a linear situation. So when you're looking at the scatter plot here, a line doesn't really give you a best fit here. So in order for us to solve, what we need to do is we need to find the summary stats, okay? And we want to find the means of the y value, which is the stock returns. So now we're going to go to stat, summary stats, and go to columns, okay? And we're looking at the stock return because that represents the y values, and we want to find the mean of that information. So when we find the mean, we get the following. So let me go ahead and copy that information here. So recall that the stock return is the value of y, and the mean of that is 17.337. So what that tells us again is that if there is no relation, then we're going to say that that y is going to equal whatever we get for the sample means. So therefore, y is going to equal 17.3. And so therefore, there is our result. Okay, now the next question says, what would be the predicted stock return for a company whose CEO made $25 million? Well, it's the same exact thing. There's no linear relation between the explanatory and response variables. So again, just like we stated in the previous one, we know that y is going to equal the sample means. So therefore, as the same result, we know that y is going to equal, again, 17.3.